Hello and welcome to Devlog 1 of Gremlin Garden, a cute and cozy creature collecting and racing game. The concept of this game is heavily inspired by the Chao Garden from Sonic Adventure 2. I assume some of you know nothing about that game since it came out in 2001, so allow me to explain how it works. In the Chao Garden, you raise little creatures called Chao. Through feeding them different foods and elixirs and bonding them with little animals, you can increase their various stats: running, swimming, power, flying, and stamina. Then you take your Chao to the races, where you watch them compete against other Chao. Your Chao's performance in any given race is dependent upon their stats as well as the type of race. For instance, a Chao with a high swim stat will do well in a race that's mostly swimming, but some races have a variety of terrain types that benefit other stats, so it's ideal to have a well-rounded Chao. Gremlin Garden will be fairly similar. Instead of Chao, you'll raise gremlins, and will have a few stats that determine how well they do in obstacle courses. However, instead of passively watching the gremlins compete in races, the player will actively control the gremlin, with more complex platforming than the Chao Garden. I know some dedicated fans of the Chao Garden may be disappointed at such a large departure, but there's a good reason I'm making this change. The Chao Garden exists within the larger context of Sonic Adventure 2. It works there because the normal levels of that game are very high intensity, while the Chao Garden is very low intensity, so it provides a nice respite from the high-speed platforming of the main levels. And if the Chao Garden starts to feel a bit slow or boring, the player can return to the more exciting platforming of the rest of the game. Gremlin Garden doesn't have this added context, so it needs to be both exciting and relaxing on its own. To accomplish this, we'll have third-person platforming races along the lines of Fall Guys or Mario, and then between races we'll return to the hub world where the player can relax while they raise and interact with their gremlins. To make the races, we need third-person movement, so that's the first thing I set out to make. A little capsule sliding around on the ground may seem simple, but there are many ways to do 3D movement, all of which result in a different feel. It took me a lot of writing new systems, tweaking the movement values till it feels pretty good, realizing the new system I wrote was overcomplicating things, rewriting everything, tweaking the movement values again, repeating that process a couple times, until finally I had a result I was happy with. I ended up having to write my own custom physics for the player because doing movement through Unity's character controller seemed like it would give me more control over the player's movement than doing it through Unity's built-in physics system. Regardless, I love the way Mario scrambles like an old cartoon when starting up his run, so I added a little bit of startup to the movement as well as some smoothing to the turning and stopping to help it feel a bit more fluid. Once the ground movement was done, I moved on to the air movement. The jump is pretty simple. The arc of the jump is just a parabola until the player reaches their max fall speed, and then it becomes linear. This makes the jump feel fairly natural while still allowing the player to maneuver in the air while falling from large heights. Much has been said in Game Maker's Toolkit videos and GDC talks about jump arcs, but what about jump ranges? i.e. the range that your character can jump in any given direction. The intuitive answer is to make the jump range of your character the same in all directions, resulting in a circle-shaped jump range. This seems to be a pretty standard approach, but what if your jump range was a square? It may seem strange, but there are some benefits to this approach. For example, imagine you were trying to jump onto a moving platform. You jump at the platform while your body is aligned with it, but while you're in the air, the platform continues to move. With a circular jump range, if you try to correct your course by holding right, the platform may move out of your range, even if you would normally have enough horizontal movement to keep up with the platform. This is because with a circular jump range, your sideways movement and forward movement are limited by each other. The faster you move on one axis, the slower you move on the other. Another example would be if the player tries to jump across a gap, but they realize in midair that they need to land a little bit to the right because there's a boost pad on the ground. They may accidentally shorten their jump by trying to move sideways and miss the jump completely. A square jump range fixes both of these problems by allowing the player to change their velocity on either axis without constraining the other. You might imagine this would make our aerial movement feel weird and boxy, but as long as the upper limit of our velocity isn't too low, it's actually very difficult to notice the limits of the square unless the player is falling from fairly high up, which doesn't happen very often. I figured all this out by looking at Super Mario Odyssey's movement, so if you think a square jump range sounds weird and stupid, take it up with Nintendo. Anyways, once I had the basic movement mechanics worked out, I made a little test level to jump around in and get a feel for the movement. I also made some moving platforms to spice up the level design and make sure my movement system was robust enough to handle it. After a bit of tinkering, I got the moving platforms working fairly well. I'm using the point velocity of the player's point of contact on the moving platform's rigid body to calculate the extra velocity to give the player, which means I had to get the rigid body to talk to the player's character controller, which was a little finicky, because Unity's rigid body system, which, in case you're new, is Unity's built-in method for handling physics, operates on the fixed update, and my movement script is on the standard update. But hey, it works now, so I'm sure that won't be a problem we have to fix in a future devlog. Anyways, next I made it so the player moves faster when running down slopes to make slopes feel more natural and make the level design a bit more dynamic. I also made it so if the player gains extra velocity, it will smoothly interpolate back to their base movement speed if they're on the ground. This has the side effect that if the player gets some extra velocity from running down a slope or from a moving platform, they can retain that velocity by bunny hopping. I don't know how abusable I want the movement mechanics to be, but for now I think bunny hopping to keep momentum feels pretty good, and it lets the player be more expressive with the admittedly fairly simple movement mechanics. And with that, the basic movement systems were finished. The next step was to make a 3D model for our gremlin, rig it, do some weight painting, and then make a bunch of animations. Like with the movement systems, it's difficult to express just how many times I reworked the model, but after many revisions, this is the final result. I think YouTube devlogs can end up glossing over the process and misrepresenting just how much work goes into each detail, so I want to mention that I did not just model this all at once, arrive at a finished product, and move on to the next thing. I continued to revise it and modify it to suit my needs as I worked on the cell shader and the animations. Speaking of which, I made a cell shader for the gremlin. I would have liked to just download a shader off the internet, but pretty much every shader I could find had the same problem of having the darkest shaded areas still be a standard lit shader so they show a gradient as opposed to a true cell shader that has distinct color zones. And the shaders that didn't have that problem usually couldn't receive shadows because they used Unity's unlit shader as a base. In order to fix this, I used the lit shader, but plugged our output into the emission property instead of the albedo, and then to get shadows from the main light I had to write some custom HLSL. Not the most complicated stuff in the world, but I've never written anything in HLSL before, so it was a great learning experience. The shader's in a good state, but it's still a work in progress as it only supports one light and it only kind of supports textures, but that's good enough for now. I also experimented with an outline shader, but it was having some problems with the mesh, and at some point it broke completely, so I decided to leave it for another day. I was feeling a little burnt out, so I decided to do something that would give the game a lot of appeal really quickly. I added some physics-based floppiness to the ears. For this, I used a plugin called BoingKit Dynamic Bouncy Bones from Long Bunny Labs that I got from a huge asset bundle a while back, for which all of the proceeds went to supporting the Ukraine. And it worked pretty much perfectly. This really helped boost my confidence, and I went into animating the gremlin with renewed passion. Again, it's difficult to put into perspective just how much I had to continually revise the animations as well as the rig in order for them to work well together. I'm not super experienced at rigging, which made the process more complicated, but eventually I had some animations I was fairly happy with, though they still aren't perfect. Once I had my animations ready in Blender, it was super easy to get them animating in Unity because the gremlin already uses a finite state machine to control its movement. So all I had to do was flip a couple conditions whenever I entered or exited a state, and there, we have animations. I fiddled around with IK foot placement for a bit, but it proved to be a fair amount of work, and I decided to save it for a future devlog. I did add some rotation to the gremlin's torso while turning to make it lean into its turns while running, and it turned out pretty well, except for a random bug that would break the gremlin's spine every once in a while. No problem, should be an easy fix. I'll just mess around with some variables. Huh. That's not quite right. What the fuck? Ah, there we go. Now the gremlin can run around, but it feels like it's missing a little visual flair, so let's add some particles. First, I created a single dust particle by using Unity's particle system to spawn a bunch of spheres that vary their size over time to give it some movement. My plan was to use another particle system to spawn the dust particles, but apparently Unity's particle system won't allow you to spawn custom prefabs, so I ended up writing my own particle spawning system. This was a bit of a technical challenge, but it ended up being really fun to code. I used a free package called MyBox, which lets you hide inspector variables based on conditional logic, which let me make a pretty clean particle spawning script with different spawning modes that will modify the behavior of the particle spawner. Now I can easily make a new particle effect just by placing a new spawner script onto the gremlin, and technically it works with any prefab I want. It's not the most efficient system, so I may have to come back and optimize it at some point, but we probably won't have to worry about that for a while, so we'll just pretend it's not a problem. The gremlin looks pretty good now, but it desperately needs some personality. My partner Tia is an amazing goated artist, so I humbly asked them if they could make some face textures for the gremlin, and they made a whole set of adorable gremlin faces. We only need one right now, so let's slap one of the faces on there and... Oh no. Please pray for my son. He's so ugly. So part of the problem is that the UV for the face is a little warped, but I think the main issue is that the face was designed as a flat texture, which is now being stretched over a round surface, so the proportions are all wonky. Plus, it doesn't help that his unblinking eyes aren't animated at all yet. To fix this, I separated each feature of the face into individual textures so I can resize and rearrange the facial features in Engine, and though it's still not animated, I got a pretty good result. Look at him, he's so happy, I just want to pinch his little cheeks. Oh, I gotta add that to the production plan. This method also has the benefit of allowing me to randomize the facial features to a certain extent later down the line, which helps make each gremlin feel more unique. We also still have those extra facial features my partner made that we can mix and match for even more unique gremlin faces, but I probably won't get around to implementing all the gremlin customization features for a while. One gremlin customization feature I do have implemented already is recoloring, so we can make the gremlin any color we want. I'm feeling kinda yellow right now. Now that the gremlin is more or less complete, let's add a bit of art for our test level. Nothing too fancy. I really like the idea of having the gremlins jump around on children's toys because I think it fits the cutesy vibe of the game, and I'd also rather stick to something a bit abstract because it's less work. But I'm not sure if these assets are the right fit. They might be a bit too realistic, and the textures stretch too much when scaling the assets. I'll replace them or tweak them at some point, but for now they're more than enough. Finally, the game is looking a little dull, so we'll add some simple post-processing, and there we go. It looks much more bright and cheerful. That's all for this devlog. The one thing I want to emphasize as we close out the video is that game development is an ever-changing and ever-evolving process. You often have to create something, test to see if it works, rework and massage it a bit until eventually you approach a pretty good result, only for the next thing you implement, be it a new animation or movement mechanic, to point out a whole new set of flaws in the last thing you made. It's hard not to be discouraged when the path forward isn't always as linear as you first imagined. But all we have to do is keep moving forward, trust in the process, get lots of feedback, and iterate. So let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I hope you'll join me for the next devlog. My goal for next time is to polish the animations and implement more movement mechanics. See you then.